This video is going to intermingle some history and some personal anecdote because it was a journey to this realization. But I'm a closet writer, and the reason that I started writing was I thought maybe if I could write a novel that was entertaining and insert in it the history of anti-Semitism, it would be a way to reach people kind of like me a decade ago, who probably wasn't going to pick up some intellectual book, but would certainly love to read a nice little novel. And so I started creating conspiracy novels to insert a message about anti-Semitism, which is that there's nothing new under the sun, and let us be different in our generation as believers. So in that, I wanted to write some of the history of England, and so I began to look at the history in a little bit more detail, and along came a long-running war that raged between England and France for who was going to sit on the French throne. And so they had been, for generations, they had been fighting back and forth, and the French had all but won, and an Englishman was going to sit on the French throne, and along comes Joan of Arc. And Joan of Arc says that she hears voices, and she's going to lead the people to a French victory. And so I looked at who were her voices. And one of her voices is the Archangel Michael. And I thought that was so interesting because the Archangel Michael is the angel of Israel. In the book of Daniel and in other places, he is the angel that fights for Israel. So then I began to ask the question, why? Why was Michael sent to speak to Joan? Why is it important to Israel that a French king sit on the French throne? And I couldn't find an answer. And I asked around and I researched. I couldn't figure out why. So fast forward to the time a year later or so, I was in Israel, and we had gone up to the Sea of Galilee, north of the Sea of Galilee, and we were staying in a hostel. And when we got there, they had these pictures all along the wall, so I began to read the captions of all the pictures, and it was telling the story of the men who built the hostel. And they had been contemporaries of Napoleon. If you've ever heard of William Wilberforce, and he had a group of believers in England that made huge social justice changes, a huge impact on, and really worthy of a whole conversation, because what they did was they acted not informed by their culture, but informed by their love of God and his heart. So anyway, so Napoleon had been in Egypt running a failed campaign, and he passed back through what is modern day Israel to get to France. And when he went through Israel, he saw what it was like there. And so later what he said was, because the question of what to do with the Jews, that was not a new question that the Germans were addressing. It was an ancient question. And Napoleon got back to France, and he said, well, why don't the Jews just go back to Israel? I mean, there's nobody there. They should just go back. And how that translated, the William Wilberforce and the men in England said, we believe that Napoleon is speaking prophetically, and they began to build hospitals and schools for the Jews so they would be there upon their return. Well, but back to Napoleon. Napoleon goes on to conquer Europe, and he, in his dealing with what do we do about the Jews, he made the decision that we're going to make them citizens. And he asked the Jewish community, if you can be Frenchmen first and Jews second, then I'll give you citizenship. And they said yes. And so they were made citizens, and that was the first time that Jews had an equal footing with the Europeans since Constantine, since 300 AD. And it was a tremendous game changer for the Jewish people in Europe. And it was all because there was a French king sitting, or an emperor at that point, on the French throne. And I thought that was really interesting.